Here we go. Hello and welcome to Redesign Your Life Today. I'm your host, Daniel Kobryner, a high-energy, heart-centered life and business coach, international motivational speaker, and passionate believer that transformation is always possible, no matter your age or your story. This podcast is a space for those of you, especially over 40, who feel stuck, off track, or disconnecting from whom you truly are. If you've ever thought there has to be more in life than this, you're in the right place. Here, we explore how to break through fear, procrastination, and self-doubt and reconnect with your purpose, your power, and your truth. You'll hear inspiring conversations with heart-centered guests who have experienced real transformation and who live with intention, freedom, and alignment. This is not about surface level change. It's about radical reconnection with your authentic self. It's about designing a life that doesn't just look good on the outside, but feel right on the inside. So thank you for being here. Let's take a deep breath, open our hearts, and step forward. And let me introduce my amazing guest of today, George Haymaker. So it's lovely to have you here, George. So as a brain science educator and coach, George helps growth-oriented professionals level up their brain performance through education and insights in cutting-edge brain science, giving them the tools they need to take control of and affect their brain performance and mental experience. Wow. This is amazing, George. So I'd like you to go a little further on and we had a chance to have a small chat, together. And you've had an amazing life and transformation in your life. And I'd like you to walk us through what happened, how was your life, and what happened with your life.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Nice to be with you, Daniel. Good to see you again. And hello, everyone. Hope the next 45 minutes or so is valuable and somebody gets something out of it. Yeah, so I did go through a transformation starting about 12 years ago. I hit a hard bottom from addiction to pain pills and alcohol, and it got really bad. At the end, I was taking up to 50 pain pills a day and drinking 2 bottles of vodka. Addiction had been using and drinking for about 35 years at that point. And addiction, as we all, or perhaps some of us know, is a progressive disease. It just gets worse and worse. And that's what happened to me. I saw all the road signs telling me I was in trouble, but it still had such a grasp on me that I just couldn't stop. So, so I hit a hard bottom, and I recognized at the time that things had to change. I just had no choice. I was going to die otherwise. I actually tried to kill myself at that point. Was not able to go through with it. But yeah, I was in a miserable place, and I had to, then open my mind to new possibilities. And clearly the way I'd lived my life to that point was not working. I was miserable. I had no meaning or purpose in my life. I'd been successful in business, so I was successful on the outside, but internally I was in pretty bad shape. And so, that started the willingness to consider new possibilities. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't even know if it was possible. I just knew that what had happened to that point wasn't working anymore. So, I can go into more detail about what's happened since then and what happened before then that got me to that place, but maybe I'll just pause there and see if you wanted to comment on that,
No,
or
well, I mean, no, I'd like you to go on with, with the story, George, because
okay.
we've got the frame here, like, wow, huge transformation, and you were really on an edge, to something different. And so what happened? And yeah,
Yeah.
and what brought you to this situation, what happened afterwards?
Yeah. Um, Sorry, I can keep talking, so I wanted to break it
No,
up a
no, no,
little
no,
bit and give you
please,
a chance to
George,
interrupt. But
George, the floor is yours.
okay, very good. So my story starts in childhood, as many people, as everyone does. But yeah, I grew up with a lot of unhelpful mental patterns in my life um, that originated in childhood, where many people's do.
Mhm.
And it usually is a result of their upbringing, family environment, things that happened to them in childhood. And so, neurologically, we're all born with a brain, obviously. It's not fully developed. There are parts of it that will continue to develop all the way into our 20s. And that part is our frontal cortex of our brain, the thinking, executive control part of the brain. So that different parts of the brain get fully developed at different points in our aging process. So what happens when we're children is very influential on how our brain develops. And a lot of who we become in life, some of it is determined when we're born in terms of genetic predispositions, from our parents, but much of what we become is a result of our actual experience in life, our life experience, our epigenetics and so on, and even some of what we're born with can be changed based on our experience. So in my particular case, uh, my dad was successful, so I grew up in a comfortable home financially, but we moved a lot because he was a corporate climber, very successful, and so we were moving constantly. Like every year, we'd be in a new city, I'd be in a new school, and that became very unsettling to me because I never had any long friendships. I was always getting my heart broken because I had to leave friends, and then I would go into a new school, and I was the new kid, and that's always uncomfortable. And then you get bullied, and so doing that probably 10 times as a child, um, was very unsettling to me. And then I started to act out because I was unsettled, getting angry and just uncomfortable. And I grew up at a time where parents disciplined their children a lot, and so I got a lot of physical discipline, a lot of whippings, heavy duty spankings. It got even worse a few other times physically, and so that caused me to feel like I wasn't worthy and wasn't adequate. Um, Love wasn't always unconditional. Um, and so when you start to blend those things together, I was starting to feel a lot of self-doubt, self-esteem issues. I was also sexually abused as a young boy by some older boys in one of the neighborhoods I lived in. And then when I was in ninth grade, my parents moved overseas. And so I stayed here in the United States and I went to boarding school. So really from the ninth grade on, I was kind of fending for myself. And none of which at the time, any of that um, seemed abnormal to me because it was all I knew. But I knew I just felt uncomfortable and anxious and not worthy. So, yeah. So then when I got to college, I found drugs and alcohol because they're readily available in college.
Mhm.
And I partook early on, and I just knew immediately that how much better I felt. Like all of my anxiety, all my discomfort went away as soon as I started using or drinking.
Mhm.
Um, and then my family has a lot of addiction in it genetically. My mom's side of the family were addicts. And so what happens is when you have that in your genes and you get a great amount of reward from using and drinking substances, it expresses the genes and and causes you to be much more likely to become an addict once you start. And so that when you combine the genetic predisposition plus the early childhood experiences that were hard on me, the odds of me becoming an addict were very, very high, 10 to 12 times more likely than somebody that didn't have that background. So that's, sure enough, that's what happened. I went into my adulthood. I was still very unsure of myself, very anxious. I would get quick to anger. And so I would operate these businesses. You know, I would kind of grind through it. I'd work very hard to try to prove myself, but I wasn't good with people because I just didn't have good relationship experience. I would get angry quickly because I was a perfectionist. And so I just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way in my development as an adult, in operating these businesses. I was very intense. And so I just was unhappy, right? I just didn't feel comfortable, and I wasn't getting a lot of meaning from what I was doing. So I continued to use drugs and alcohol all the way up until I was in my early 50s, and it got worse and worse, as I said. And at the end, you know, it just had taken over my life. I couldn't stop using. I was having to wake up every couple of hours to drink. I would throw up. I would drink more and take more pills just to get my system to calm down. And finally, I knew that the gig was up and I had to go into rehab, which is where everything kind of started to turn around for me. I had to go into 3 different rehabs actually because, you know, I didn't quite the 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 idea of quitting didn't quite take hold until I was in my 3rd rehab. So over about a 6-month period of time, I was in 3 different rehabs. And finally, with the last one, it began to stick. I did relapse 6 months later after that, but that was kind of the last time. And I've been sober and clean for 12 years. As part of that recovery journey, again, I knew that I just couldn't keep living the same way. So I had to just listen to people for the first time, people that had been through recovery, to take what advice they could give me because they knew. And so I shifted from being someone that felt like he knew everything to knowing nothing because I didn't know anything about what was going to happen next. I just knew that I had no idea and I had to start listening. And so that's what I did. And that started the process of me opening my mind to all kinds of new information, approaches, possibilities. And so I went into AA, which is a 12-step program. I got a sponsor. I went through that, which was very helpful in helping me stay sober. But AA does not give you a really good understanding of what's happened in your brain, because that's where all of this resides, is in your brain. All the mental discomforts, the addiction patterns, everything that I was struggling with resided in my brain. And so AA doesn't explain that to you. It just says, do these 12 steps. And if you do them and stay dedicated to them, you will stay sober. But it doesn't explain why. And so I need to know, I'm the kind of person that wants to know why and how, and so I can take control of it. I have a high degree of a need for autonomy and for skillfulness and for understanding, you know, what I'm doing. And so that caused me to want to read a lot of books. I read a lot of books on psychology, spirituality, and ultimately brain science, because again, that's where all of this at the end of the day resides, is in the brain. And so that became, a few years ago, I came out of another business and I said, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I started looking back on what I had done and what I have to offer people in the world. And I said, well, this was the most transformative, meaningful experience in my life, was hitting bottom and recovering. I think I know how to share this story with people in a way that will help them, not just with addiction, but anything having to do with change in the brain. And so I started taking a bunch of graduate level courses in neuroscience, and I got certified in neuroscience and coaching. And that's what I do now, is I help people, whether you're suffering from addiction or not, Maybe you're just struggling with your mind, your mental patterns, um, anxiety, self-confidence issues, anger, um, you know, self-doubt. It could be almost anything. And you just feel like you're stuck. You can't change. You don't know how to change, but it's really hurting you in your life. Or it could be just people that, want to understand their brain better and understand, because the brain is this amazing thing that's like a capacity tank, and it has the ability to achieve all different types of levels of performance. It's very similar to our bodies, where our bodies have this whole range of performance. And
Mhm.
depending on how well we eat, how well we sleep, how well we train our bodies, will determine the level of performance of our bodies. The same thing is true with our brain, is there's this huge range of potential and capacity. And very few of us understand how much of it we're really realizing. Where are we in this performance range? Are we out of shape? Are we at tip top shape, or are we somewhere in between? And how do we access more of it? And so that's what I help people do, is I try to make the brain less complicated and take people inside of it so they understand the workings and the functionality of the brain, so they can actually take control of their brains, establish a new partnership and relationship with it, and start to determine themselves how to achieve higher levels of capability and capacity and performance, um, how to resolve mental experiences that aren't helpful. And so it just becomes this whole new possibility for them that they never realized existed, because now they start to understand how their brain works.
Wow. Thank you so much for,
Right.
for outlining, I mean, first, your experience, and this is so powerful, George. And let's let's come back for once just to addiction. Once I had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Gabor Mate, and basically, it's the first time I heard, for instance, about, transgenerational trauma. And he was talking, he was, for instance, talking to a native, how do you say, native nations in Canada, and they were explaining, the trauma they had from generation to generation. And this is why they were resorting to alcohol and drugs. And he was interviewing as well people in the, like red light district of Vancouver. And it was so powerful because he was explaining, uh, yeah, addiction, it's like you resort to this when you are completely disconnected with whom you are. Is it something which would resonate with you, George, in terms of, when do you resort to, you know, in to addiction? Because you were saying before, I started taking alcohol and drugs, and then I felt better. Just to understand from the brain perspective.
Yeah, well, there's a couple different facets to it. Um, so I think when you say you feel disconnected for who you are, I think I look at it as who you want to be,
Okay.
because all of us are who we are at the moment that we are that, and we become who we are as a result of our past experiences. So the brain is made up of 85 billion neurons, and these neurons have the ability to move around
Mm-hmm.
in and form connections with other neurons. And they do that through their experiences. So every time we think something and feel something and behave a certain way, these neurons move and shift around and connect to one another in these patterns or strings like Christmas lights, and they form these these strings that represent the ways of our thinking, feeling, and acting. And
Mm-hmm.
so all of us have different roadmaps in our brain, different patterns of these neurons, because we all have different experiences. So who we are at any time is a result of these patterns in our brain, because our brain will bring forward or predict how we should think, feel, and act in today's environment, the present, based on how we've thought, felt, and behaved in the past. Because that the brain is a prediction machine. it records all of these experiences in these pathways. And when we incur something in our present day experience, the brain takes in that information as to what's happening, and it goes into its recesses and pulls out memories of past experiences that are most like what's happening now. And it says to us, hey, here's how you thought, felt, and behaved before when circumstances were like this. So this is what we predict you should think, feel, and behave now. And so what happens is that continues to get reinforced over and over again. If we keep thinking, feeling, and acting in the same ways over and over again, these patterns get stronger and stronger, and the brain just keeps regurgitating them, okay? So if we have unhelpful things that have occurred in our life, and therefore we've developed these patterns as a way of getting through life that aren't helpful, like let's say in my case, I had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of self-esteem issues. And so every time something that would happen in the world that would cause me to feel uncomfortable or I feel threatened, I would have attacks of anxiety and panic and self-esteem issues and all of that. Well, those are those patterns in my brain that develop, okay? And so they just happened over and over again because my brain kept saying, well, here's what you did before. We think you should do it again because we know that you somehow got through it and you stayed safe. And so, but that may not be, that ended up not being who I wanted to be. And so where this mental difficulty comes from, or I call it friction, which is like anxiety or depression or just anger or things that, are unhelpful, that's mental friction, is the difference between who we are and who we really want to be. So it's that chasm between the two. And so I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to be, an ass, and I didn't want to be feeling the way I was feeling, and I didn't want to be a problem for other people. Really, that's not who I wanted to be deep down, but that's who I had become. So it's the identity I had developed, but not the one that I wanted. And so that's where, you feel uncomfortable in your own skin, and that's where you want to use drugs and alcohol, is because it makes all that go away. Okay. And so that's part of the issue. Is that difference between who you end up becoming and who you really want to be. Okay. The other part is the physiological component of addiction itself. And what happens there is that the reward network of the brain, the limbic network, where you get these chemicals that say, hey, this feels good, let's go do it again. That's dopamine. Dopamine is the motivation chemical. When you do drugs and alcohol, they give you 2 to 10 times more dopamine of that chemical than any you can get from any natural life pleasure. So the best sex you've ever had, the best steak dinner you've ever eaten, the time that you fell in love, the best friend you ever had. Drugs and alcohol give you 2 to 10 times more than that. Okay. So it stands to reason, because the brain loves reward. The brain doesn't do anything unless it feels motivated, right? We don't do things unless we have motivation, right? And so if the brain is built on seeking reward and avoiding threat, then it's going to migrate in the direction of what gives it the biggest reward. And so if you're getting more reward from drugs and alcohol than you're getting from normal life pleasures, you're going to go do the drugs and alcohol. Now, you may say to me, well, that's crazy. Why wouldn't everybody be an addict if they're getting more reward from drugs and alcohol than any of these other things? Well, that's where the front part of your brain is the impulse control. It's the executive thinking control part of your brain. It also is responsible for evaluating consequences and for impulse control. And the reward part of the brain and the front part of the brain are supposed to counterbalance each other so that we just don't go off willy-nilly and seek reward with no consideration of the implications, okay? That's what's supposed to happen. But the problem is that front part of your brain is still developing until you're in your mid-20s. And so that's why teenagers are more susceptible to becoming addicts if they start early, is because their front part of their brain is not fully developed, and it's not acting as the brake on these desires that the reward part of their brain has. And that's what happened to me. I started at 18, and before my front part of my brain was fully developed. And so I was just out of balance, and I just succumbed to it. So that's really, there's two components. One is, we use substances to deal with mental friction and the mental discomfort. And then we also use it, because it just feels so good that our reward part of our brain gets hooked on it. It gets hijacked. It starts to value the drugs and alcohol more than it does any of the other life pleasures.
Okay, wow. And so when you said you went, through, to different rehab centers, I mean, and the third one was, I mean, the good one. And so which kind of support are you getting when you are there? I mean, is there like a psychological support? Or how does it go? Just
So the first most important thing it does is it separates you from the drugs and alcohol.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not like you couldn't walk out the front door and scale the wall and leave, I suppose, but it does create a geographical separation from your life that has been leading you down this path. So that's the first most important part. Then there's a lot of education about addiction. You are then meeting with psychologists usually, and different types of medical doctors that are help getting you through the withdrawals comfortably with medication. But I will tell you that the statistics say that I think it's 90% of the people that go to rehab will relapse. So, in my opinion, relapse or rehab centers are not set up to succeed very well, especially if you don't stay very long, because they don't, in my opinion, and again, I'm making a very broad general statement, at least the ones I went to, didn't do a great job of teaching you and helping you practice what life is going to be like after you leave. Because, you can stay in this little cocoon for 30, 60, 90 days, but at some point you're going to have to leave, and you're going to have to go back into the real world where you're going to experience all the same stressors and other things that cause you to use in the first place. And so there's not a lot of real world role playing and practicing as to what you're going to do different when you go back out into the world. That's number one. The other thing that is not fully dealt with, and again, in fairness, you're there for 30, 60, 90 days. It's not like everything can happen all at once, right? And so, but what needs to happen is there's always an underlying reason why people are using and drinking. They don't just use and drink into that place without any underlying discomfort going on. It's usually in response to this mental discomfort that we've talked about. And so the key is you have to get sober and deal with the addiction, but then you also have to address the underlying causes of what causes you to be uncomfortable mentally in the first place. And that takes some time. Like, you have to understand what these patterns are. You have to figure out where they originated. You have to figure out how to loosen the grip that these patterns have on your psyche so you can let them go. And then you have to develop new patterns that are in line with who you want to be as a person going forward. And this stuff all takes time. And so you don't get that much exposure to psychiatrists or psychologists or therapists or coaches in rehab to adequately take you through that place. So, and I don't think people realize when they leave rehab how much of that they're going to need to do. So it's a good place to start, but again, the relapse rate is very high, and there's just a lot of work that has to be done after you leave rehab. Rehab is not a end all be all.
Well, thank you, George. Thank you. So if we go now for your journey as a coach, and obviously now you are helping people. So is it people who had addictions or people who have issues? And how did you start the coaching journey? Which kind of coaches did you have, and how do you support them?
Yeah, so I work with people that have addictions of various types,
Mm-hmm.
people that don't, that are, that are just struggling mentally in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Or actually, a lot of the people I help are just people that maybe don't think they're struggling, but they just want to understand their brains, how they work, so they can have more success in their life. Because again, I don't know about the average. Well, I do know about the average person because I certainly didn't. And a lot of the people I meet don't understand how their brain works. And so they understand a lot more about how their bodies work than they do how their brains work. And they don't realize how trainable the brain is. It's as trainable as the body. And they don't realize how much influence they have over the performance of their brain. And so that's really, the bulk of the people that I work with are people that are interested in that. They're growth minded. They're into self-help and development. They want to know what's possible, and they want to understand the information and tools that they need to help affect how to achieve greater performance so they can have greater success in their life. It could be in their careers, it could be in their relationships, it could be just within themselves. They want to feel more in alignment, they want to feel more fulfilled, have more meaning in their life. And so when you understand how the brain um, forms those things, then you can understand how to get there.
Okay, no, thank you. And for instance, so imagine somebody comes to you, they have, an addiction or not, but they want something better in their life. What is the process? Somebody comes first time, they know they need they really want to know more. They don't understand the brain. So, how long does how long do you work with these people? What's the process, in terms of, first, third steps, if you can get us through that?
Yeah. So I have a couple different ways I work with people. Um, on the brain performance end, so
Mhm.
people that are just curious about their brains, how they work, they're not trying to do any dramatic transformations in their own life. Like they don't have an addiction, they don't have any really noticeable affected mental patterns that are really holding them back. They just want to know more.
Mhm.
That's an ongoing club membership. I call it. It's actually forming as we speak, but it's a club membership where people join on a monthly basis,
Mhm.
and I have education that's ongoing. And so we I have modules that they read or can listen to. We review them on a weekly Zoom call. The Zoom calls are recorded. I send out weekly articles, monthly newsletters. We have a community so that people can get together in groups and hold each other accountable or set up little teams to work together on some of this stuff. Um, Office hours where they can come in and talk to me about what's going on with them personally, how to take some of this information and apply it to their lives. So that's kind of an ongoing. I call it the gym membership, but for your brain. So it's the same thing as having a gym membership for your body, but it's a gym membership for your brain.
Mhm.
Um, Somebody that wants to do more deep one-on-one work and maybe transform and has some specific things that they want to change, that would be more us working for 90 days very intensively on that individual's particular set of circumstances. There's still a lot of education about the brain so they understand. Again, there's just something powerful in having the information about how the brain works so they can begin to understand why they're feeling the way that they're feeling or why they're dealing with addiction, like what's happened in their brain. And then what about the brain is going to allow them to change, and what does that change look like, and how are they going to get from where they are now to there. And so there's really a lot of education around that, because if you just tell somebody to do something and they don't understand why or how, they're not as invested in it. The picture's not as clear. So I feel that's a really important part of it. So they can take ownership and autonomy in the success of their own journey that they're going under. The reason it's 90 days is because, as time goes and we begin to go through this process, in order for the brain to change in a long-lasting and sustainable way, the brain has to experience a lot of repetitions of what it is that's new that you're introducing to it. So if you're trying to get rid of old patterns and introduce new ones that are more helpful, you have to repeat those new ones and stop repeating the old ones, and do it long enough that the brain begins to solidify those new experiences into habits. And that's just the way that the brain learns. It learns through lots of repetitions. It's the same thing as the body in the gym. We don't expect that we're going to go to the gym in the first week and get big muscles. We know that we're going to have to stay with it and go to the gym, 3 to 5 times a week and keep working out the same muscles over and over again. And we're going to see little gradual improvements. Exactly the same thing is true with the brain. So it's like a muscle. And then the other thing is that the brain needs to detect and experience reward from doing the new things that we're asking it to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because the brain, again, does not want to pursue anything unless there's reward in it. And that should sound reasonable to people. Like, unless something sounds good to us or we're motivated to do it, we're not going to go do it. And so that's important when you're putting in these new habits or patterns, is to really consciously identify with the reward that you're getting from it or hope to get from it in each and every time that you do it, because then the brain, you're closing the loop of that habit where the brain gets to experience the reward part of that habit. Because if it's not pleasant and you're not getting any joy from it, then the brain doesn't want to continue to do the new pattern. And so, so it just takes time. And so I wanted to be with somebody long enough. 90 days is a kind of a minimum amount of time where you're doing these things often enough and experimenting with them and meeting to reinforce them, that it begins to stick.
Okay. And when you say 90 days, it would be you would meet them perhaps once a week or sometimes even more. It depends.
Yeah, so it's once a week formally, for 90 minutes.
Okay.
But then then they have the ability to come and reach out to me in any way they choose. Call me, text me, email me in between to talk about, hey, this happened. What do I do? Or I slipped up. I just wanted somebody to talk to about it. And so then, because that's the way that these things work, is it's not always smooth sailing. You will slip up and fall back into old patterns. And so it's like 1 step back, 2 steps forward, and that's okay. But then we understand why the brain is doing that. And so what ends up happening over time is that we become less overwhelmed by our brain and our minds. We start to look at it more analytically as a organ that operates a certain way. And when things happen that aren't pleasant for us, we begin to understand from a clinical perspective why that is. So it's not so much like this is happening, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, I have no control, my world's coming to an end, versus, okay, this happened, it's natural, now I know why it happened, I'd prefer it not happen again, and so I know what to do about it. And so it's more of a clinical, objective partnership with the brain that it is this overwhelm that typically happens, right?
Yeah.
For most of us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes full sense. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
And you're talking about new habits. For instance, we hear a lot about, for instance, I don't know, morning routines. This kind of, I mean, can you give us some examples or give the listeners, some examples of, perhaps daily new habits, which could help? Or is there anything which comes to mind, where really we're start doing things, they experience a lot of changes?
Yeah. And so let's just take brain performance as an example.
Yeah.
There are lots of different parts of the brain that are trainable. So our cognitive capacity, our memory, our attention, how will we pay attention or focus on things,
Yeah.
our motivation, our nervous system. These are all parts of the brain that are trainable.
Yeah.
I don't know if we realize that. So you can actually improve how well you think, how well you pay attention, what things you get motivated by, how calm you are, a whole bunch of different, they're called brain domains. Okay. And so it's very much like if you look in the mirror and you want better abs, better stomach, right? You know what to do. You eat different things, you eat less, you go to the gym, you do lots of sit-ups, okay? You know what to do to get a better stomach.
Yeah.
The same thing is true with all these different parts of the brain that I'm talking about. And so most of us wake up, maybe brush our teeth, have our coffee, and then we're right into the phone or something else. But what if you took the first half an hour and actually trained your brain? You're probably going to go to the gym later and train your body, but when are you going to train the brain? And so it's really like expecting that we're going to have this great body and never having to go to the gym. Not realistic, right? So why would we expect that we're going to have this great brain if we never train it specifically for the things we want to be good at in the brain? So we could spend half an hour doing a variety of different activities, or even one per day for every day of the week. Like Monday, we could work on our attention. So we could do meditation. And we could, as we meditate, we could sit there, and as our mind begins to drift, keep bringing it back to focus. And there's all different types of meditation, but we could make Monday our attention day and do attention-based activities and exercises that would help improve our attention over time. Kind of like we would improve our muscles over time. Tuesday could be motivation. So we would, every time that we would do exercises to focus on the kinds of things that we want to be motivated by. So every time that we multitask or scroll on our phones or do social media, the brain is motivated by that because it's going to get little hits of dopamine relief, feel good, because it is enjoyable for a second, right? It's novel, it's new. Our brain gets little tiny hits of dopamine and motivation for doing those things. But the problem with that is we never get anything done because we're like multitasking, and the amount of energy and resources that it saps from us is twice the level that it would be if we just did one thing. So the amount of mental resource they're, they're called resources. It's a combination of, glucose, um, neurotransmitters, all of this fixed amount of resource that we have in each of these brain domains. We will sap those resources twice as fast if we are multitasking, because you have to draw your attention out of one thing, put it into another. And it's very inefficient spending of resources. So you actually spend less resources if you stay focused on one thing intently than you do by multitasking in and out of things. So when you're scrolling on your phone, doing social media, in and out of this and that, you are spending your resources twice as fast as you otherwise would. And so that's why if you get tired at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you know why, because you've been spending your resources incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very much like driving a car that gets 35 to 40 miles a gallon versus 10 miles a gallon, right? You want to get as many miles per gallon as you can out of your resources. So the point of it is that you can set up these morning routines of 20, 30 minutes where you're practicing all these different things so that you're building a better capacity in your brain. You're training the parts of your brain to have them be more efficient. Bigger tanks, bigger capability. And so that's, and it's great to do first thing in the morning because you're starting fresh with, a full tank of resources, and it's great to, introduce this to your brain first thing before you get started with your day.
Okay, no, thank you. For instance, how important is for you the practice of gratitude?
Yeah, it's very important, because again, gratitude is a very calming practice.
Mm-hmm.
In that it's very efficient metabolically. So when we're wanting for things, or when things aren't enough, we're spending a lot of energy around the idea that we don't have enough and need more. When we're grateful for what we have and the way that things are,
Mm-hmm.
The amount of resources that we spend on that are much lower. And so it really helps calm our nervous system. It helps, um, put things in perspective for us. And it just really helps, set our mind up for success. I just find it a really good nervous system conditioning activity and tool,
Mm-hmm.
because, your nervous system that's one thing. It's a module that I work on in my programs, is really understanding what the nervous system is, all the different branches of it, all the different nervous system states, so that if people are aware of it, they know what state they're in and how to conserve these resources. Because we can have completely different mental experiences if we're calm versus if we're active and agitated. And those are two different nervous system states. So by practicing gratitude, you are calming your nervous system, getting the baseline of it down low. And so you're spending less resource, and the mental experiences that you're going to have are going to be a lot better because they're going to arise from a calmer nervous system.
Thank you. Thank you. And perhaps last question, it's about what's the importance of surrounding yourself with, with a support network and, with like-minded people.
Yeah. So we all have a need to socialize. It's one of the things that we're hardwired with. We're hardwired to survive, to eat so we can survive. Um, and socializing is one thing that we're hardwired to do, because in the olden days when we were cavemen, and there were threats out there like dinosaurs, we learned early on that we could survive better if we grouped together in groups, to help each other ward off threats and the enemy. And so we were given this wiring in our brains to feel good and be motivated by getting together in groups. And so that's why, we feel so good when we meet and have good friends, when we fall in love and have a mate. That's why we get feel good neurochemicals, as a signal that we're supposed to be doing this. And so, that's why we want to group together and band together with like-minded people, because it helps reinforce, what we're after in our lives, and that banding together with other people that are like that is very motivational to us. And togetherness is one of the 6 core psychological needs that all humans have. Togetherness or connectedness to others is a very core foundational psychological need that people have. It's more important to some people than others, but all of us have it. And so that's really the purpose of our lives, is to satisfy these 6 core psychological needs, of which togetherness is a critical one of those.
Thank you, George. And actually, obviously, for our auditors or our listeners, sorry, I'm French, who don't know what these 6 components are, can you perhaps, briefly walk us through what they are?
Sure, they're autonomy, and I can circle back and we talk about them if you want, but autonomy, equality, skillfulness, stability, significance, and togetherness, which is the last one that we were just talking about. So obviously autonomy is our desire to have control over our outcome.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to have the ability to shape our own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Equality is a measure of fairness. We all want to feel like we have a fair chance in the world to pursue our dreams and be who we want to be. That's why when people are in cultures and societies and governments where they don't have the freedom and they don't feel equal, where there's haves and have-nots, that's why it causes so much polarization and unhappiness, is because people don't feel it's fair. Mm-hmm. Significance, which is our desire to feel like, what we're doing in the world, is meaningful, that who we are means something. Mm-hmm. Skillfulness is our desire to feel adept. Whatever things that we're choosing to do with our lives, we want to be good at them. Stability, which is the ability to feel that you're safe, that things are going to be okay, that you have what you need to, feel taken care of and protected. And then obviously the last one is togetherness, which is that desire to feel connected to others, feel like you're not alone in the world, that you have people that care for you and love you, and that you can care and love others.
Thank you so much for this outline for the auditors. And perhaps last question, which kind of tips would you have for our listeners? Which message would you really like to pass on? Imagine people particularly not being satisfied with their lives, having addictions. What would you really advise them to do?
Yeah, so I know when you're in that place, because I've been there,
mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like you can change. And some of that, is just a lack of understanding around the fact that we can change. The brain, all of this stuff that we are struggling with, if we're struggling, occurs in the brain. Mm-hmm. And the brain is merely a filing cabinet or a hard drive of our experiences to that point. Mm-hmm. And it got to be the way that it was because we had all these past experiences. But the brain is not fixed in that place through the gift of what's called neuroplasticity, which is these neurons' ability to reshape and move around and repattern. The brain is more than willing to change, mm-hmm. but it requires us to change the brain we have to start the change process. In other words, we have to show the brain a different way in order for it to remap itself. The brain is not a leader, it's a follower. So it's very much like a dog that you can train, but you wouldn't expect to go up to a dog the first time and say, hey, would you mind sitting for me? The dog has no idea what you're talking about. You have to actually show the dog what sitting means, and then you have to give it a treat. So you're basically showing the dog what you want them to do. You show the dog that it's safe, and you give the dog a reward. And then you also know that the dog is not going to sit the very first time after you've showed it once. You know that you're going to have to do it a lot of times. And so that's really what we're doing here, is we're showing the brain many, many times with reward that what we want it to be different, how we want it to be different. But we have to do it a lot, and we have to show it, experience the reward over and over and over again for the brain to begin to shift and change. So once people understand that that is the process, then they say, okay, well, if that's how it works, then I see that and I believe it because it's science. I mean, it's that, like, I'm not guessing when I tell you this, and it's not me who created, this information. It's decades old that we've known about it, and it's real and it's proven. So therefore, if we know that it's scientifically true, that it's possible, and we know how to do it, then that starts to then break down this idea in people's brains that, well, I can't change, or I'm too old to change. Because this idea that the brain change, that neuroplasticity, it has no age limit on it. We can do it late into life. And so it's never too late to change, and it's scientifically possible. So then we begin to understand that the only thing holding us back is us. And so if we want to say to ourselves, well, I can't change because I don't want to change. Okay, that I get that. But you can change. And so if you don't change, then it's because you don't want to change. So that's, I just think there's a lot of hope in the fact that change is scientifically possible. You have to decide if how things are now is not good enough for you, and you're willing to do what it takes to get better at whatever it is you want to be better at. And I try to explain to people, it's like learning a new language. It's like learning to play a new instrument. All these things that you have learned to do were not easy at the beginning, but they became easier. You envisioned that at the end, how cool it would be to speak a second language. And it was hard at the beginning, but it got easier. And that's the same way that brain change is. Because actually, when you learn a new language, you're changing your brain. And so when you're trying to become different mentally, it's like learning a new language. It's like your brain is learning a new language when you become somebody different mentally. And so if you just look at it like that, as a challenge that's going to be cool when you get there, it becomes less overwhelming.
Well, thank you so much, George. It's been absolutely fascinating, and thank you so much for your insights about the brain. And obviously, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to work with you, if they want to be part of your community, which you were talking about? I mean, just tell us what's the best way.
Yeah, they can either go to my website, which is georgehaymaker.com, and sign up for a newsletter there. They can schedule a discovery call, which is free. We can talk for a half an hour and talk about what's going on with you. You can go to any of my social media and follow me, and I'm constantly posting information about my programs and other types of just neuroscience information. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. You can find me on YouTube, all of those places.
Okay, thank you. And actually, all these details will be will be put, under the YouTube video. So all your details. And I really want to thank you for your time, George, and for being so open, and I guess our listeners took a lot today. There's a lot to take, and there's a lot to go through to learn now. So anybody who wants to learn more about the brain and how to reframe their habits, please contact George, because there's certainly a lot to be gained there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. Pleasure to be on.
Thank you. Yes.